Maryland head coach Kevin Willard has been in the news not just for leading the Terps to the Sweet 16, but for being the obvious aspiration, shall we say, of the Villanova coaching search, and meanwhile trying to improve the status of his contract at Maryland. To help us break down all of this, I caught up with CBS Sports senior college basketball writer Matt Norlander earlier today. Matt, let's get right to it. Yesterday on CBS Sports Network, John Rothstein reported that Kevin Willard is basically deciding between Maryland and Villanova is apparently willing to wait for him. Is this consistent with what your sources are telling you?
Yes and no. I mean, I've got someone connected to Willard who still remains unconvinced that Willard will actually leave Maryland. This is a fascinating situation. We just almost never get something like this where a coach is into the second weekend of the tournament and the potential for them to leave the school they have taken into the second weekend of the tournament is quite public and quite out there. I mean, purely by what we see happening right now, and Villanova having not made a coaching move with any other available candidates lead us to believe that Willard should be considered the most likely. But you know, Villanova is wired a little bit differently. I mentioned this on Eye on College Basketball as well. I was talking to one industry source as well, who was just musing aloud. This was not informed speculation, but it was more just, hey, you know, from what I know with how Villanova is run, if I'm Villanova and I actually am waiting on Kevin Willard and I see him just absolutely trashing Maryland on multiple occasions, like, is this someone that I truly want to bring in to be my next coach? This person was just wondering if Willard might be potentially hurting his candidacy in the process of doing that, to which I replied, maybe, but maybe he also knows that Nova's waiting no matter what, so what does he care? I also think it's entirely possible that he is openly leveraging his situation. He does not have an athletic director. Damon Evans is leaving Maryland to go to SMU. Doesn't know who his next boss will be if he stays at Maryland. And now he's going to take every opportunity to inform the public and put some pressure on Maryland officials to further emphasize financially how much Maryland needs to be competitive within the Big Ten in order to be competitive nationally. So to circle back to your question, I don't have information that Kevin Willard literally has a contract waiting for him once Maryland's NCAA tournament run ends from Villanova. I won't be surprised, but I remain still open to the possibility that Willard does not go to Villanova and returns to coach the Terps on a very, very healthy new deal.
Now, contextually, let me ask you this, because there was a lot of noise around Villanova and Richard Pitino before Pitino accepted the Xavier head coaching job. How far down the runway did that get? And was this really a matter of Pitino picking between those two Big East jobs?
It was not, as far as I can tell. I mean, Richard Pitino had been contacted by Villanova for weeks. VCU had him at the top of the list. West Virginia had inquired into Pitino, and obviously Xavier came along pretty aggressively. From what I gather, Xavier just seemed like the more beneficial move for him. He knew that Xavier had put him to the top of the list. Chris Mack was also under consideration for that job. But knowing there was a certainty with Xavier, the athletic director, Greg Christopher, flew out on Tuesday morning out of Cincinnati to New Mexico to meet with Richard Pitino and try and close a deal. He opted to take that job. You know, he'd consider that he has, you know, plenty of history in the general Cincinnati, you know, Kentucky, Louisville area and all of that as well. So, yeah, he was involved in Villanova. He was considered one of the finalists, if you will, for the job, but with no guarantee that he would wind up getting that job. He takes a job that I actually think probably suits him better overall with just who he is and how he is wired. And that's obviously a wonderful plot line for the Big East. As you well know, in some ways, Richard is like his father, Rick, and in many ways he is not. And that's and I say that in a complimentary fashion to both men, but Richard, will tell it like it is not here for the BS, and is always good with a quote. And the Big East just got some incredible content for however long both of those choose to coach in the Big East in the coming years.
No doubt about that. All right, that brings us back to Villanova. So here's my question. If Kevin Willard doesn't take this job, given how fast the carousel has moved this year, given the dominoes are now falling out of the portal with commitments happening, St. John's got a big one yesterday from Joe Sansanin. Like, what's next for Villanova if it's not Kevin Willard?
Ooh, that's a good question, and no one quite knows the answer to here. Porter Mosier, his name was attached to this as well. At this hour that we're talking, Adam, like I put it at a slight chance that he could still be involved there. but not an overwhelming chance. Also, consider the possibility that if Willard does choose to stay at Maryland, how prepared is Villanova to pivot? I'm of the opinion that it has another candidate that it has in mind. If it winds up not being Willard, how could you not at this point, frankly? But yeah, it is very intriguing because we are destined to have one situation or the other. Either Maryland will be forced to scramble to find a new coach on the heels of getting knocked out of the tournament, which we don't even know when that is. We'll see if I'm right or not, but I've got Maryland beating Florida. What if the Terps continue this into the weekend? That would be fascinating. Or you've got Villanova losing out on Willard and just opting for whatever reason that not being the arrangement. And then where does Villanova go? These are two jobs that are fairly similar overall in stature. Personally, I would put Villanova slightly ahead of Maryland overall. Personally, it's not that they're not that far apart, but it is intriguing that you've got two jobs kind of waiting on the whims of the decision, potentially of one man, and obviously what Villanova truly wants to do there. So it is all the more intriguing. And, as soon as Maryland loses in the tournament, provided that it does, it's not unthinkable that they could win the national title. That'd be incredible. We wait and see on the hours that follow with Kevin Willard and the Terps.
All right, Matt, my last question. If that does come to fruition and Kevin Willard thinks like you do, that Villanova is potentially a slightly better job than Maryland, he doesn't get the guarantee of support that he wants from the Terps because, as we know, he wants to spend that extra night in New York City at Christmas time, and that is a non-negotiable. If he does not get that extra night in New York City, do we know any of the names that Maryland may be working on? Because I understand they're without an athletic director, but given the amount of publicity around this, you would think that they have to be poised to make a move very quickly if Kevin Willard does depart.
So if Maryland comes open, the names you'll hear attached to it are Dwayne Simpkins. You'll hear Tony Skinn, who's the coach of George Mason. I would toss out Mike Rhodes, who's at Penn State and has Virginia connections. I actually think would be a logical name to look at. Buzz Williams would be a name that I think is, he coached at Virginia Tech, obviously. Those are some initial names, but Maryland is in a very interesting situation here. If it does lose its coach, doesn't have an acting athletic director, and when you don't have that situation, you can really, it can turn into a not good situation for the near term for the Terrapins there. So, yeah, if I was in a position of power, if I was running the University of Maryland, I would be doing everything I can to make sure Kevin Willard stays there. And oh, by the way, Kevin Willard's a solid coach, but just a reminder to our audience, it is interesting to hear all this because Kevin Willard is in the Sweet 16 for the first time in his career. He's been a solid coach. He's made some NCAA tournament runs, but it has not been gangbusters from the start. He did a good job at Seton Hall. He parlayed that into getting the Maryland job. But of all the coaches to have this much buzz around their candidacy to leave from one school to the other, it is intriguing that of all people, it is Kevin Willard.
Thank you, Isaiah Whitehead. Thank you, Derek Queen. Kevin Willard, the ball is in your court. Matt, appreciate you making time. I know you're headed to the games. I will see you later tonight on HQ. That's Matt Norlander, everybody. You can check him out, CBS Sports HQ tonight, Eye on the College Basketball Podcast. And for more on Maryland, their search, and everything Terps, you can check out Inside MD Sports on the 24/7 Sports Network. That's Inside MD Sports.